the statement works better if somebody else can talk first, but I'll do it anyway. Thanks. I've lived here since 1980 in D.C., and I've watched people talk about statehood, but have seen very little happen. I have to wonder how many D.C. politicians really care about autonomy, self-determination, or statehood, since so little has been done. Is it just political theater to energize their voting base and let them claim the moral high ground and blame all of D.C. government's failures on that obstructionist Congress? And what if they got statehood on their terms, the terms of the D.C. political class? Would it just mean a few of them got jobs as senators, representatives, and their staffers? Would voters have actual input into what statehood looked like, or would they be ignored as they were ignored in 1994 when they voted for term limits by 66% margin and the city government nullified? We should take the movement for statehood, for D.C.'s self-determination, out of the hands of politicians and give it to voters. We should actually even take it out of the hands of everybody's here and give it to voters. We should have a referendum on self-determination in D.C. in every election. That would be easy to do, so that all Americans can see that it's actually supported by hundreds of thousands of people who don't have equality before the law, and not just by, it's not just a notion of the local political class, which is sometimes the butt of jokes of voters around the country.
Time.
Thanks.
Coming Wells.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having this important forum. This was a priority for me to be here because this is an issue that's extremely important to me and to our city. DC statehood. Thank you to Stand Up for Democracy, who's also better known as Free DC, and for our Statehood Coalition. How this comes home to me is that I'll never forget getting up Saturday morning and reading the paper after the first budget showdown, and they reported in the paper that what happened in the conversation in the White House between Barack Obama and Speaker Boehner is when the president said to the speaker, "Look, I gave you DC abortion." I still cannot describe how crushed I felt, because I know we have enemies. But when our friends say something like that, so the first thing I did was that I wrote, I went out and got PayPal and sent a big contribution to Planned Parenthood. But that was not enough. I really stewed on it, so with many of you and others, on that Monday, I went out and protested. I sat down in the middle of the street, we stopped traffic, and I was the 41st person that was arrested that day. And that's what it meant to me, is that we're fighting for our rights, our freedom, to where you don't have a budget showdown, where the president can bargain away the rights of women in D.C., where they could never do that to a state.
Time. Bruce Majors, would you engage in civil disobedience for the cause of statehood?
I would, preferably with a lot of other people with me. I don't have any problem with civil disobedience.
I guess you answered that question already, Tommy Wells, by your previous action, but would you like to say something about civil disobedience in the cause of statehood?
Well, I absolutely did, and I would, and I believe also that when a leader takes a stand like that, I made sure the reason why I was the last one to be arrested, so that I would be the last one to go home, to be sure that everyone was taken care of before I left. And so I was there until 4:30 in the morning, and that was, again, I would do it again and again and again, that our rights are not to be bargained away.
The District of Columbia budget has a surplus, a huge surplus, but there is no funding for the Tennessee Plan shadow senators or representatives. Would you include in your budget, if you were mayor, increased funding for statehood, for the Free DC movement, for the shadow offices of senator and representative? Bruce Majors.
I would really prefer to see it be a popular movement that comes from the ground down and ground up and comes through as a referendum. I don't want to see it become a kind of financed little lobby that just exists to produce jobs for people who want to work on that one issue but then don't get anything done.
For 18 years, we've had this, you still got some time, so let me engage a little bit. Reverend Jesse Jackson was the first senator that had his benefit meetings, but others have come along that have not been so endowed. What about that?
Yeah, but I think that's partly because we don't ever seem to put this on the ballot as a referendum issue. It's really just a small group of people who talk about it, which is fine, but I think actually allowing people to vote on it, and I think they vote for it, would engage more people and might, it would have a much bigger impact than having a few more people who are paid to be full-time lobbyists and sort of go to meetings and talk about the issue.
Tommy Wells, DC stated in your budget if you were mayor.
Of course I would fund it, but there's two things. We have to come together on a unified plan on what we're funding. We're not just funding positions, we have to fund a strategy of how we're going to get statehood. It has to be agreed upon, and I would work on a unified, and we divide a plan together. I will also have someone on my staff. As your mayor, there'll be someone on my staff whose job is to work on coordinating with Congress, with our own delegation, and with the White House to get us statehood. So yes, of course I'd fund it, but there must be a plan that we agree on together of how that we're going to get statehood. It's not just funding positions, it's funding a strategy.
Mr. Majors, where would you rank statehood on the list of DC's priorities?
I think DC has lots of problems that won't automatically be solved by its getting more autonomy or self-determination of being a state. I don't think they're actually wholly or mainly caused by people from outside of DC. I think they're mainly caused by DC government policies and some federal policies too that we may or may not be able to change. So I think it ranks somewhere in the middle.
Anything else?
Well,
Tommy Wells' priority for statehood.
well, the reason that it's so important is the reason that we're unable to do things that a state can do. When you think about needle exchange, the highest HIV transmission rate in the country, and Congress blocked needle exchange. They could not have done that in a state. You think about when I'm trying to navigate through the decriminalization of marijuana, some people say, why not just go for legalization? Well, frankly, we know what would happen. Most likely is Congress would prevent us from legalization at the same time where we have certainly a social justice issue of how many of our residents are being locked up, 5,000 a year for small amounts of marijuana, not able to get jobs afterwards, or certainly impacting the rest of their lives. So I had to think about what would Congress do. And so I took an incremental route. Now I've since found out that my colleagues weren't ready to go as fast as I'm ready to go anyway. But that when I think about the laws that we passed, same-sex marriage, we could not have gotten that through where any state could have. We had to wait until we had a particular favorable Congress. When you think about the laws that affect us every single day, abortion rights, certainly things related to civil rights and issues of social justice, that we're sometimes forced to either take a half measure or we're forced to incrementalization because Congress is sitting on our shoulder. We cannot fully represent our residents like we could in a state because we don't have statehood.
Bruce Majors, how would you use your position, if you were mayor, to educate people outside of the district about the new Columbia Admission Act and the need for statehood for the people of D.C.?
Well, I do think the mayor needs to do that, and I found Mr. Wells' answer just now on especially criminal justice issues that not having statehood blocks was important, but almost made me want to change my earlier answer. I also think we have some economic policy problems in D.C. that I don't think the current DC political class will solve, whether it's a state or not. Anyway, I again like the idea of there being a referendum, so it's not just the people in this room and the other half of the people who belong to our sponsoring organizations who have been so nice to sponsor this debate, and elected representatives in DC who are talking about statehood. So instead, it's really obvious to American voters at large that hundreds of thousands of people went to a ballot and voted to say, give me self-determination, I want to have equal voting rights to everyone else.
We're joined now by Rita Lewis, who can begin by answering the question, how would you, if you were mayor of the District of Columbia, use your position to educate people outside of D.C. about the need for statehood for our residents?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry to be late. I was at another forum, as you can just imagine. What do we have to do? I started off this conversation this afternoon first about talking about the difficulty that we have all had to endure today when we received the news once again about our government shrouded in an air of malfeasance, air of investigations, and one in which it does not make us a DC proud. I'm a 35-year resident of the District of Columbia, and I'm running for mayor because I know it's time for a change, and you have told me repeatedly that it is. So in terms of going to your question, that change has to come about how not just the difficult days that one politician or politicians or the political establishment have had, because it's not about elected officials, it's about us as a community. And so what really has to happen, as I have traveled around the world and throughout the United States, it became very, very clear that most people really do not understand that D.C. does not have the same rights that they do as a state. And so one of the things that I would want to ensure is that we put the sense of continue to put the sense of urgency, and we continue to bring clean, honest government, because that's going to be the first thing that anybody's going to look at if they want to make sure that they go into partnership to give us the kind of rights that we want to enjoy like everyone else.
Peter Lewis, how would you use your position if you were mayor of the District of Columbia to educate D.C. residents about the benefits that they would derive from statehood?
The most important thing is that, we sit here in the home of I call it, we all know, the leader of the free world, who I have the opportunity to represent. Educating D.C. residents, I think we know. We know what we don't have. What we want to make sure is that our elected officials have the ability to go into partnership with government, whereby we will be able to leverage all of our resources. That really becomes, I think, one of the biggest things, is that it has to be a discussion that takes place locally, regionally, and nationally, as well as internationally, because people find it absurd that the District of Columbia does not have that. But I believe that technology now allows us to move forward aggressively on this education process. But we also have to make sure that as we use technology, as we use social media, as we use all the tools and resources at our disposal, that we're not just explaining it to our residents in the district, but we're also explaining it to people around the world, and to ask them to join us as we galvanize them in the fight for self-determination and for us to be able to, as they say, if we're going to be a state, we got to look like it.
Tommy Wells, how would you educate residents of the District of Columbia as to the benefits that they might derive?
Well, first to the question that you asked, that I haven't answered yet, which is part of my job as mayor, that every delegation that comes here that represents other states, part of my job as the mayor, that when I speak to them, talk to them, meet with them, is to talk to them about our plight, the plight of our citizens, of what we don't have because we don't have statehood. And then, anytime I travel outside of the District of Columbia, it's part of my job is to, again, inform people that the residents in their nation's capital do not have the same rights that they have, and it's unacceptable, and we need their help. That whenever they need our help, we have been there, whether it be in wars, battles, civil rights, marching. DC, the residents of DC have been there. And so we need to be there for each other, so part of my job is to do that. And then obviously I do believe that for our own city, for our own residents, whether there's a majority or not majority, right is right and wrong is wrong. And the fact that we don't have equal rights in the District of Columbia is wrong, and part of my job is to represent that, talk to students, talk to everyone at any place, but that's part of my job is educating the district residents what we need.
Time. If there's anyone in the audience who would like to pose a question, raise your hand. We have volunteers who will give you a card. You can write your question out so that we can address the grassroots questions from the ground up as well. What specifically, your presence suggests, everyone's presence here suggests that you support DC statehood. Bruce Majors, what have you done in the past to advance the cause of statehood for DC?
I've only run once before, and it was for federal office. I haven't been elected. I've been a private citizen working in the private sector. So other than talking to people about it, I haven't worked on any statehood issues.
Tommy Wells.
Well, it is part of my platform whenever I run for office. The DC statehood is an extreme, is part of why I'm running. But let me also say I'm a progressive Democrat. There's a reason, and we saw the reason today, but there's a reason why I do not take any corporate contributions. It needs to be part of a progressive Democratic platform to have full statehood for DC, along with all the other things that undercut our full rights as citizens. Look at the Koch brothers and Citizens United, one of the worst decisions ever by the Supreme Court in undercutting our rights as individuals. Everything that chips away from our rights chips away from everyone's rights. Whether it be saying corporations are people, or not giving voting rights and statehood rights to the people of the District of Columbia, it all comes together. That's why I'm a progressive Democrat. That's why I'm running for mayor. That's why I'm not taking one dime from any PAC, any corporation, as I run, because you have to live your values. You have to actually walk the walk when you talk about being a Democrat.
Yes, totally support full statehood for DC. But the most important thing is that as your next mayor, I will put my money where my promise and where my pledge is. And the pledge is that we can't pick organizations one over the other. We have to come together in a compact to say that we must fully assist in funding this effort. It cannot be an either or. It cannot be sometimes we do it, sometimes we don't. We have to have a full commitment. And full commitment, we know, is all about financial resources. But it is not just about the dollars. It is about putting the pressure where it is needed the most. It is about developing the kinds of partnerships, ones that I have developed over 35 years of working with members of Congress and working regionally and working nationally and working now internationally. Because it's going to take that compact that we would have to have with the residents of the District of Columbia to really make what we know fundamentally is fair for all of us to have full voting participation in Congress and in the Senate. But also it is to talk about and to work with us as a community and to show that citizen responsibility, that it is not just about a one-shot deal, but it is something that we have to do from a comprehensive perspective.
Bruce Majors, in recent years, the tide has turned in support of LGBTQ rights, so that it's no longer even just a Democrat issue. Republicans, in order for legislation to have passed in as many states as they have for same-sex marriage, it has become a bipartisan issue. How has that issue progressed, and what do you think you could do so that the issue of DC statehood might be able to advance in the same way with gaining support across racial and partisan lines?
I'm not sure how parallel they are, but I think that most
Parallel in that they both were opposed violently a generation ago.
I'm not sure the parallel there either, because I don't know that many Americans across the country have a strong opinion about DC statehood. I don't think they're out there, American voters, violently opposing DC statehood. And I also think that probably a lot of them never really violently opposed gay rights. They just were sort of following along with what they were told to believe, and as soon as their sons and daughters and cousins and coworkers came out and said, I'm gay and you've always liked me, and so you should think of me pretty much just the same. They changed their mind, and that's why I think that, again, instead of very small numbers of people from a couple of groups or small numbers of DC politicians should be funded to talk about statehood or self-determination for the district or equal voting rights, we should have a much wider group of people do it, like at the ballot box, have hundreds of thousands of people vote for it, because lots of people who are Americans have a friend who lives in D.C. or a relative who lives in D.C., and it should be approached in the same way.
Regan Lewis, DC statehood no, LGBTQC.
You know, it really boils down to, at the end of the day, fundamental fairness and inclusion, of which I learned my set of values from my mom and dad, just like so many of you. But also were on full display when I integrated my 7th grade high school and junior high school. And one of the things that I learned as a daughter of the South and growing up in the segregated South is that there's so many issues that we sit in Washington, D.C., in a very progressive city, and I'm very proud to be a part in a community that shows about that there should be equal opportunity for all, that we're going to approach all of our issues from a perspective of fairness and inclusion. But most importantly, as we talk about LGBT issues, we have to constantly be reminded that we have to talk about how we build a city for everyone, and a city for everyone means that in areas around, whether it's around housing, around education, around job opportunities, and most importantly, around health care, that we make sure that all of our residents have the same fundamental rights as anyone. And so one of the things that I think is really, really critical is that, you know, we are a different Washington, D.C., and the Washington, D.C. that we're all proud to call home is one which is very inclusive and also one which makes sure that we continue to uphold fundamental fairness.
A very detailed question from, obviously, an informed...
I would like an opportunity to answer that question.
I'm sorry.
I don't want to be pushy up here.
No, I'm sorry.
But when we passed marriage equity, I told everybody, if you're in a relationship, in a same-sex relationship, get married fast. Because we want as many people to have the impact. These are the workers on Capitol Hill. These are family, friend members that I wanted the Republican or the conservative folks to have to vote against either their family members, their friends, or their staff. And that's the same thing that we can do around statehood. I realize that the city is stressed with how many people are moving here. I understand that, but one of the benefits is that we will and are having a lot more diversity. We do have a lot more conservatives, Republicans, that are choosing D.C. as their home. And so they too have friends and family members across the country. They too would like to have the same rights as everyone else, should they decide to raise their families here, which many are. So I do believe that it is a similar issue, that as this impacts more demographics across the country, that we will have a greater position to push for statehood.
I have a question that I guess starts with Tommy Wells because it's so technical. It says the Tax Revision Commission has recommended that we restore the DC tax rates parity we had with federal rates when we got home rule in 1973. Period. If the council and mayor approve this, it will put $85 million in our pockets each year. I'm not able to fact check this. Perhaps you may. Will you sign such a bill or as a council member, work immediately to make this happen? You get to do the fact checking and answer the question first.
Well, the first thing is that as it relates to the standard deduction, it should be the same as the federal government. So I will support and sign a bill for our standard deduction to be the same, so that people that do not itemize, who tend to make a lower income or a middle income, can keep more of their money. But on the other part, I really do believe we need a progressive tax code. And I would keep the higher end. When it sunsets, I would say let's keep it in perpetuity because we need a progressive tax code. I also would not go the full amount on inheritance tax. I would increase the inheritance tax exemption a bit because We have so many families that have homes that are now worth $1 million to $2 million that they want to pass on to their families, and they will not be able to do it under the current limit. So I would bring that up so people can keep their family homes within their families, but I would not take it up to the $5 million as proposed. And so with that, I would take some, but I would keep a progressive tax code for our city because that reflects the values of who I believe we are.